This is Tom Scott's Podcast Express. Conversations about music, movies, politics, art, and a whole lot more with some of Tom's very special friends. Without further ado, here's Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Scott. My guest today is an award-winning author, speechwriter, talk show host, and political commentator. He was born in Philadelphia and college-educated in Massachusetts and North Carolina. At the age of 22, he began 2 years of service in the Peace Corps in Swaziland. He later moved to Washington and joined the United States Capitol Police, subsequently serving on the staffs of 4 Democratic congressmen. He became a presidential speechwriter in the Carter administration and later served 6 years as chief of staff to House Speaker Tip O'Neill. He worked for 13 years as the D.C. bureau chief for the San Francisco Examiner and another 2 years as a nationally syndicated columnist. He's covered every presidential election since 1988, and in 1997 he premiered his talk show Hardball, a television news staple for over 20 years. He's also an author of 8 best-selling books about the Kennedys, Nixon, Reagan, and others. Although he's viewed by many as a, quote, liberal, he's seen fit to criticize people on both sides of the political spectrum and has referred to himself as a centrist. He holds no less than 34 honorary degrees, including 16 doctorates from numerous universities and colleges. His latest book is entitled This Country, My Life in Politics and History. I've been a fan of his ever since he appeared as a panel guest on the McLaughlin Report many years ago, and I'm very proud to introduce him now. Welcome, my friend, Chris Matthews.
That's very nice, Tom. Thank you.
I'd like to start just by asking you something we've never talked about. As a young person growing up, what were your interests and career aspirations? Were they always in the direction that you eventually took, or did you have other goals?
Oh, my God. I guess for a while, I wanted to be a red-faced defense attorney, criminal defense attorney. And I wanted to go in the courtroom and yell and get the good guys off. And then I thought, a slight aberration from that, I wanted to be a red-faced columnist who could go into a bar and have the bartender yell at me about my column that morning, one way or the other. It didn't matter whether it was negative or positive, just yell at me about my column. And then I wanted to be on television as a red-faced host of a TV show called Hardball. So in a way, I wanted to be the Irish caricature. I really, for some reason, wanted to be that sort of ruddy character, you know? And I think I succeeded one way or the other.
I think so. You are not full Irish, are you? You're part Irish.
No, we're 3/4. My grandmother on my dad's side emigrated from Northern Ireland and in service, as they used to say, as a housemaid, I guess. And my grandfather, who's the one who's not Irish on my dad's side, was an English chauffeur from Dover. He emigrated about the same time. The other part of the family, my mom's side, which is really what we're all from, is totally Irish American. The Shields is the Conroys, the Quinlans. I apparently have a likeness to the Quinlans. People told me that. So I like both, Northern Irish, Protestant and Catholic. There was a small wedding, because back in those days, these were called mixed marriages.
Right.
My grandmother was Presbyterian. My dad was raised Church of England, I guess, because his father was English. And the rest of the family is all Irish Catholic. Eventually, my dad converted to Catholicism, so everybody was happy.
After college, I wanted to talk about your service in the Peace Corps. We've never really talked about that either. I read that Swaziland, now known as Eswatini, I believe, has the lowest life expectancy in the world. What a tragic statistic.
They've had a bad time with AIDS. AIDS has been a problem, right? HIV.
Oh.
And they didn't get the right leadership. There was the problem, you know? So a lot of the men had numerous wives. That was the tradition. And I guess lack of sexual restraint might be part of it. But the real reason was that the leaders of the country just they didn't want to. It was, first of all, the Peace Corps volunteers who went there more recently, say 10 years ago, during the real height of the AIDS pandemic, had to come into town and say they're there to help with the health of the children. That was the only way they could safely do their jobs, was to tell the town. They went into the village, that they were there to help the mothers with nutrition and health of their kids.
Right.
If they'd said they'd come in there to help them with AIDS, the men would have gone crazy, because the men would have said there would be more sexual restraint and other kinds of stuff. And anything that suggested they were going to get in the way of these guys' normal way of life was going to be life-threatening.
Right.
So this was a serious problem, obviously, for the Peace Corps volunteers. And talk about it, not a very attractive way to spend your life. I mean, you're spending 2 years just constantly telling women, don't get this disease from your husband. I mean, that's really what you did. It's a very important thing to do, but it was just tough work, especially when you know you're the enemy.
Yeah, yeah. You said you had a friend in the Peace Corps who said, I think this is a great quote, "People don't mind being used, they mind being discarded."
Well, that was John Katniss, a wild friend of mine over there who was always on vacation somewhere having a good time. He was always having a good time. And but he told that about relations with people, just not even a cultural thing, just sort of a social aspect of life, that people want to be needed. They like being needed.
Yes.
Used is a tough word for it, but they like being needed. They don't want to be dismissed, discarded. Right. And I thought that explains a lot of American politics, that you can have a group vote for you for years, say the white working class, then they'd get the feeling, rightly or wrongly, that they were discarded, that they were never part of the Democratic future plan.
Right.
And they go, okay, you guys used to like me. I used to like you. Now you don't need me. I don't need you. I think there's a lot of that attitude that explains Trump's success.
Right.
He was able to pick up those disgruntled, again, fairly or not, but people have a right to have their own attitudes, and that was their attitude, that they were dumb.
I heard you say that working class people, white and black, should belong to the same party. They basically, their interests are the same, but they're divided by other issues.
Well, I think that's exactly the conundrum that the Democratic Party faces today, that they've not been able to win over minorities. I'm not a big identity politics person. I think you're seeing, especially among the Latino community, Latina community, you're going to see a lot of people becoming Republicans just because they're very entrepreneurial. They believe in small businesses. They don't like big government. They come, almost all cases, from terrible governments. You know, Mexico's had a mixed history.
Don't you think the word for them, socialist, is like poison, like something awful?
Yeah, because they've heard that from people who are not good people, whether it's
Right.
Whether it's Maduro or it's Daniel Ortega. That's just an excuse to take over everything, and to be a tyrant. And again, I don't think the word socialist or even government makes them. They'd like to be self-reliant. I mean, the people you meet in this country, when you meet them, the ones who just got here, probably without documents, they're skilled craftsmen.
Right.
They're amazingly how quick they are to get a job done. They don't waste time. They get the job done quickly and well. And that's because of aspiration.
Right.
They want to make it in our country. And I think they don't want to just join the welfare rolls. I don't think at all. They may have older members of their family they have to have some help with, but I don't think they want to do that. They don't want to just come here and live off the dole, as they call it. I don't think that's what they want. That's not their American dream.
Well, I wanted to say to you, first, thank you for the day when I was in D.C. that you invited me to observe preparations for an episode of Hardball. You referred to it as watching the sausage being made. And as I sat in your office while your staff dashed in and out putting the show together, I was blown away really at how quickly it got assembled and on the air. I suppose having done it for years, it was just business as usual for you, but I thought it was really amazing because you got news happening,
Tom, that's what I love the most. You remember in the old movies, I guess the 30s movies, where they were always about big city newspapers. Somebody like Clark Gable and Have One Night, or somebody racing into the executive editor's little booth and saying, "Rip down the front page. We got
hold the presses.
This is going to blow this town wide apart." And those were the great moments in those stories where the newspaper man or woman was the hero. And what I love about it was about, you nailed it, about 6 o'clock at night. We have an hour before the show goes on, or even 6:30. Something breaks on the network, on NBC or Associated Press or Agence France Presse or whatever, Reuters, and all of a sudden we have a front page for the story, for the program. So we throw out everything on A block goes to B block.
Right.
The new A block is the news, and it always was our best shows. Absolutely.
When there was instantaneous headlines, just
because
wow.
you want to have, it's called the news, and the news has to be fresh. And 6:30 is when everybody's hearing about it for the first time. They're hearing about it on your show for the first time.
Right.
That's exciting. You don't want to have to just rewrite the story from they got up with in the morning and try to make it interesting, which unfortunately on many days, that's the situation we're in today. I don't think times are quite as exciting now as they were with Trump around. But I was watching one
Thank
show.
God.
I was watching Steve Colbert, who I think is great, trying to make a show about the ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. I mean, it's just not that important, and it's going to go away in 2 days. But,
I heard,
but I remember 9/11 sort of created, however, this cadence of news almost every day. There was for years, ever since 9/11, 2001. It just changed the acceleration of new things going on. And so there's very few days that we're going to find when there's nothing going on that's worth a front page.
Right.
But I think we get to do the front page the night before. If you haven't noticed, Hardball breaks the story at 6:30, and then the next morning they see that in the headlines.
Right. So you're a bit ahead of the game in that way.
Yeah, well, that's the difference. Newspapers have the challenge of, I was a paper boy, and I used to deliver the Philadelphia Bulletin, which was a huge newspaper. And in fact, they used to have the ads in the New Yorker magazine. It said, in Philadelphia, nearly everyone reads the Bulletin. And it was like huge circulation. But we had to get them out. They were delivered to the firehouse near me at 3 p.m. I started distributing them and got them out by 4:30 or something. And but the only news in that newspaper is what happened after noon. I mean, at noon, before noon, I should say. Right. Because you didn't have the stock closings. You didn't have the afternoon political news. You had what happened in the morning. And so people said, this isn't working. And so they only ended up reading the paper for the op-eds, for the columnists, the national columnists. And that's all they could offer. They couldn't offer news. And that's when the natural transition came to these nightly talk shows. Let's face it, these talk shows are basically the op-ed page. They're all opinion. It's maybe too much opinion, but it's no longer just that coming in from New York, Dateline Dallas. It's not like that anymore. It's more like, let's talk about it.
Right. It's yeah. In Los Angeles, my parents subscribed to a morning paper and an evening paper. And the morning paper, of course, was the LA Times. The evening paper was the Citizen News, the Hollywood Citizen News. And it suffered from that same syndrome you're saying. They can't really, it's all morning's news. It's stuff that's already, in a way, common.
Yeah, I discovered one other thing is that our newspaper on Tuesday was huge. And I had to go back for a second basket of newspapers because it was so big. And the reason was on Wednesday was sales day downtown Philadelphia.
Right.
So all the big department stores, Wanamaker's, Lit Brothers, Strawbridge's, all of them had their sales on Wednesday. So everybody went into town. In those days, there weren't suburban shopping centers. You went into town on the train or bus to shop, all the suburbanites. Well, guess what? Guess what day all the presidential candidates would have their motorcades drive through Philadelphia? Noon Wednesday.
Let me guess. Oh, yeah, that would be it, right?
And then they would say 1 million people turned out for Richard Nixon. Well, they didn't turn out. They walked out of the store and looked at the guy. But it was, so you had this interesting symbiosis among newspapers, downtown Emporia, and politicians, all working around this big day of Wednesday. Tip that I picked up I picked that up as a paper boy.
Yes, I guess you did. Yeah. I do want to talk about some of your writing because, and writing in general, because you have said there are 4 rules for writing.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are. They're easy. And I tell this to people who want to write their memoir or whatever. I said, don't sit around worrying about the first sentence. You'll never get to the second sentence. It's just, you'll never get there. You're worrying too much about what it looks like on paper. All you have to have in your head, if you want to write a book, is the 4 steps. And you have to always stick to that step. And if you ever get into writer's block, it's because you got out of your step. The first step or stage is scribbling down on paper every idea you've ever had for a book, every little episode, every theme, whatever. Just put it on paper and draw squares around it. Each one of the ideas, just put a square around each one so it'll all be discrete from the others. And once you've done that, once you've exhausted your memory of everything you think is the coolest story you ever heard, or something really important about relatives or interesting personalities or anything you got in your head, put it on that paper.
Right.
And because that's called collection. And you shouldn't confuse that with anything else. Don't confuse it with writing or anything else.
Right.
The second thing is organization. Forget the collecting for a while. Just focus on where you're going to draw the lines among those boxes. How are you going to put those boxes in order? And usually it's chronological.
Right.
And that's a good standard, or most important. But chronology is an easy one. So just stick to the term organization. Don't be thinking originality or collection or anything else like that. Just think one thing. How do I put this in order?
Right.
And the third thing is just as important. Forget collection, forget organization. Just think about you're going to rough it. And all you have to do to rough it is a simple thing. Take your list of organized ideas. You now have them in a list. You did that in the second segment. You just put it in order. Then rough it out. Sit with a typewriter, a word processor, and just knock it out. I don't care if you're tired, you had a couple drinks, it doesn't matter. Just knock it out in order the way you laid it out in organization. And just knock it out. So you're already there. You've taken 3 steps. You never had writer's block. You didn't have to worry about it or second guess yourself. You collected, you organized, and you roughed it. Now you have a rough draft of your book or your magazine article. And then the 4th step, and only the 4th step, polish it up. Just sit there, maybe take a day off, come back and polish it up. Just make it better. And then it's either done or you turn it over to a pro to take another look at it, or a friend to do that. I'm telling you, more people get in trouble with writer's block and wasting their time talking about what they're going to write. And I got to tell you a great story. When I started to write my first book, Hardball, I was at a party and I was talking to a couple of friends about it. And one was Bob Woodward, the great Bob Woodward. And I was BSing. I'm going to write a book, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be about politics and the rules and how it really works, blah, blah, blah. And Bob Woodward, who could be a tough reporter, was wonderful. He said, come over to my house on Monday after work. So I went over to Bob's house and I sat down on a couch, and in front of me, on the coffee table in front of me, he had a tape recorder. He said, I want you to outline your book right now. Take all the time you need. Just tell me what the book's about. Well, believe it or not, that Thursday, I got a transcript of everything. And this was a big deal back in the 80s. I got a transcript of everything I said and a cover note saying, here's your first draft. Get going.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. So he's a very generous guy. And but I mean, I was lucky to have somebody to push me that way. And I think I'm pushing the people now who are thinking about writing something. If you got the ideas, and I know you do, and you have the basic ability to organize chronologically by just putting them in boxes and separate them and drawing the arrows from one to the next, and then simply sitting down and knocking it out. Don't sweat it. Don't sweat the words. Knock out the progression of your thoughts, just what you wanted to write. And then sit and polish it as best you can. And if you don't think it's good enough, get somebody else to look at it. But as best you can, it's probably pretty good if you follow these 4 steps. And it works for me.
That's why I failed so miserably at trying to write and start a book, because I would start polishing before I went anywhere near to the end. And that's you're probably faithful.
Worried what it looked like. You're worried what it looks like on paper, which is you have no idea what it's going to sound like. And basically, we're oral people. And
right.
I know you're not a musician, but I think we are. We listen with our ears, we remember with our ears. If you ever have to remember a telephone number, just say it to yourself out loud, and then you can hear it. It echoes. Don't try to memorize what it looks like. Don't try to memorize what the numbers look like. You'll never remember it. But imagine it as a sound.
Yep, that is true. Didn't you have a book editor who like admonished you, saying, "Why are you writing like you're on television?"
Yeah, I did. She's really smart. And I think she was saying that I was too, I don't know whether I was too loud. I'm not sure what she was working on, but I disagree with that. I think the last step you can follow, you don't have to, is if you read it aloud to yourself, does it sound right? And make it sound like you, and just keep saying it until it sounds right. And if you can't say it, you didn't write it well. If you can't just recite it like you're to 3rd grade, just recite it once you polished it, and you'll know where the rough parts are, and you fix it.
I wanted to ask you, you've said that you're a great deadline writer. We have this in common. When I was scoring television shows and movies back in the 70s and 80s, as the deadline got nearer, somehow the musical ideas started to flow. And it's like the old isn't that true? Like the old 2,000-year-old man sketch where Carl Reiner asks Mel Brooks, what was the means of transportation 2,000 years ago? And the answer is fear. When the dinosaur's after you, you run like hell.
Yeah, well, that's for the people who believe some of the real conservatives sociologically believe that there are dinosaurs around in the Old Testament, but nobody noticed them.
I didn't. Yeah, that's right. I didn't see much of
the Earth's a lot older. The Earth is a lot older than the Old Testament. A lot older. Millions.
At the risk of stating the painfully obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, millions of years separate Israel from the old days and the days of the Bible and the Old Testament as well from those big dinosaurs. Yeah. Well, I do think a deadline works. I used to get up in the morning. I'd be on a road trip giving a speech somewhere, or during the Pat Sajak show, as I remember the other day. Right. And I would get up in some hotel, and I had to catch an airplane by 8. And since I was on East Coast time, I'd get up real early at 5 and knock that baby out in an hour. And it was okay. But I loved it. Wow. I guess I've had a couple jobs I thought were fantastic. I love being a presidential speechwriter, because I worked with a great guy, Rick Hertzberg, and I love what I was doing. And the other one I loved was writing a column, because wherever Kathleen and I went, I'd write a column about it. You know, we went to Ireland, I'd write a couple of columns about it. Or I'd go to I'd be in Jerusalem, I'd be anywhere, South Africa, I'd write about that. Berlin.
Your writing chops are getting work out all the time.
It's fantastic. Right? You're enjoying you're narrating the adventure. How can you beat that?
Yeah, right.
How can anything beat being a foreign correspondent? I don't think there's anything like it. Because you're telling people something they know nothing about. It's fresh material. It's exotic by its nature. My God, what's happening in Berlin right now? And I got to be there at places like the Berlin Wall when it was coming down. I got to interview these Germans. I got to interview the Hungarians earlier that year. I had interviewed I was down in South Africa. I got there when they had the first general election for all races. And I'm with Bishop Tutu when he's voting. I mean, I had these great opportunities, you know.
Oh my God!
And I went to Northern Ireland for the Good Friday Peace Accord. I got to see Ian Paisley in action. I got to watch the Protestant men cheering for peace. I got to watch a lot. So pretty nice.
Fantastic. I want to ask you about your television show, or your series of television shows. How difficult was it doing the show the way you wanted to do it?
Well, I had the idea of a sort of a Perry Mason approach to television, which was I'd ask tough questions and I'd pursue them to the point where the audience may have groaned a little. But I also thought that the audience was always dissatisfied when someone in a position I was in, a really lucky position, didn't ask the right question or didn't ask the obvious question.
Right.
So I felt that I should be a little unpopular to be popular. I felt that I should ask the tough questions and keep pushing at them. And that got me some great breaks. You know? I mean, I got Trump to say something ridiculous about abortion. And
I know. I was going to mention that.
Well, he didn't know what he was talking about. He bought into the argument of the pro-life position, which is fine, but he didn't know what he was talking about.
That's right. He riffed. All he did was riff anyway.
Yeah, he just thought that was part of his right-wing coalition, and he said women should be punished. Well, even the most fanatical pro-lifer, and it's certainly a legitimate position, would never say that. First of all, it would be unsavory to blame a woman who gets impregnated. You're going to punish you now.
I know.
I don't think that would have worked politically, but he didn't know what he was talking about. He was unprepared to be president because he had spent his life not preparing.
Right. I also remember a great night when Zell Miller almost got into a slugfest with you. He was so pissed
Well,
off.
he wanted to duel. He wanted to go to a duel with me, and he was so flustered with me. And I felt a little bad about it because I did respect the fact he had served the country all those years, and he probably been high-hatted by some of the liberals in the Senate. There's something made him really upset with the Democrats. And anyway, before he died, I wrote him a note, and I said, this wasn't a great night for either of us, and I felt bad about it. But he wrote me the most wonderful letter back, handwritten. It was just wonderful because he said it had been bothering him ever since. He felt embarrassed.
Aw, that's nice.
It's amazing. I also got a late in life call from a congressman I almost got a job with when I first came back from the Peace Corps, a guy from New Jersey, and he had been in trouble with the mob. He had been mobbed up, and he got in all kinds of trouble. And he called me up. His daughter called me up. One of his many daughters called me up and said, "Dad wants to talk to you before he passes." And he was sort of inanimate at that point. He wasn't able to talk, but I told him about him. I loved him. He's a great guy. I always thought that he protected me from his problems because he wouldn't hire me. He was going to hire me, and he did because he was in trouble with the FBI, and he had been caught on tape. He'd been caught on tape, basically placating a local mobster, saying he would protect them from his gambling operations from the police. They got him. But I think there's a little complication there. J. Edgar Hoover was on this guy's trail too, because he was pushing legislation against surveillance. So he probably was mobbed up, but I like the guy. So what can I say? I think I've dealt with a couple of unsavory characters over the years. Rostenkowski went to prison for really stupid stuff. And when he got out of prison, which I figured like he took the rap for other guys who did just as bad or worse, I called him up and said, "Let's go to dinner." So we went to Gibson's in Chicago, he and his wife, Lorraine. And I just figured out I can do that. When Charlie Rangel got in trouble, I said, "Let's go to lunch somewhere where we can be seen." I always figured I could share whatever goodwill I had and good reputation with these guys. And
nice.
I always figured that the ones that get in trouble are the ones that are taking the rap for the ones that didn't get caught. How's that for a philosophy?
Well, there's probably a lot of truth in that. Good Lord. Well, I want to ask you, one constant complaint, and legitimate, I think, in politics, is the expense of running for office. If it were possible, would you favor a system of public campaign financing?
I don't know how. I don't have. That stymies me because the public will never support it, and it's part of this new bill that Pelosi's pushing. The speaker's pushing some kind of financing. But I'll tell you, the public looks at it this way: if you're rich and you want to run for office, good for you. If you want to spend millions like Rockefeller did in New York, go ahead and do it. But I'm not going to pay so you get to be famous. I really think that's it at the heart of it. You want to be a celebrity? Pay for it. It may not be working to the public. My wife, Kathleen, ran for the United States Congress and went out there and raised the money the legal hard way, small donations, ran a pretty good, well-financed campaign, not greatly financed. Then somebody came along and spent $13 million of his own money.
Oh, my Lord.
With TV advertising all over the place and road signs every 10 feet. And it's totally legitimate. No, he was a good candidate. Jamie was good. It was another guy. It was the third candidate in the race. No, Jamie's a fine congressman. No, that's not. That wasn't. Yeah. But it's Jamie Raskin. But I think I don't know the answer. I guess there could be some subsidy where you could reduce the cost. It used to be a college professor from Notre Dame or University of Wyoming would get elected U.S. senator. There are a number of those days where they just run on the fact that they have the knowledge, they have the ability and the will to be a public servant, and they're just ready to do it. And people say, "Well, he's president. He teaches at University of Wyoming. Let's make him the senator from Wyoming." Those days are gone. You don't hear of somebody who's a teacher, someone like that who make. But there was a time when you could afford the TV time, and let's face it, it's TV. And maybe it's changed. Eddie Markey up in Massachusetts was able to beat Joe Kennedy III, with social media campaign.
Oh, is that how he did it? Oh my Lord!
And he was basically matching the Kennedy money, but it was really about being able to. Today, I think AOC was showing it when she beat Joe Crowley in Queens. I think you can win if you really build a grassroots organization with small donations. And that's really about being smart with a really good message. I think you can win if you're really good progressive or, I guess, conservative message. If you get people excited enough to give $50 or $100 and add it up, that's the ideal, obviously. That is the ideal.
Right.
Small donations from lots of people.
Right, and people have done that. I mean, it's possible, isn't it? It's just like
in California, where you are, it's almost impossible because California.
Yeah.
Jerry Brown, the former governor, once told me that 3/4 of California households can pick up Los Angeles TV. So that means if you can buy television in LA, you can basically reach the voters. And
that's
a lot of money.
That is true. It was suggested once that sitting congressmen wear jackets much the same as NASCAR drivers, where they have the logos of all their main contributors printed on the jackets.
Joe's Meat Market, yeah. But I may have made that suggestion once. I do think it's true.
Maybe I heard it from you.
Who sponsors this guy or woman?
Yeah. What can you tell us? What's your comment about all these, Fox people, Tucker and Hannity, and their very loose application of the truth?
Well, I can tell you, I don't want to name names, but I'll tell you this. I do watch certain people, and I absolutely believe they're not saying what they believe. I think they're much smarter. They're playing to an audience they're trying to build, and they're willing to say something in reckless disregard. Reckless disregard, meaning I don't want to know the truth.
Right.
It's so close to lying, it might as well be called lying because it's about saying things that you gave it two.
Where's the line between one and the other? Good Lord.
Well, nobody who's honest says that Trump won this last election, but people said it on TV. It's not fair. It's just it's wrong to lie, and there's a reason why we have libel laws, but you can't use it for journalists, of course. But you should be able to just recklessly say something that if you took 2 minutes to study it, you know what was wrong you just said. And buying into conspiracy theories and blaming it on the voting machines. Stuff that's totally... Of course, you can always get an anecdotal something, some anecdote and say, that proves the election was fraud. No.
Sure.
There's always going to be imperfections in everything. There's always mistakes. Newspapers have corrections pages. Products have quality control on the assembly line. Mistakes are made in every activity. But to say that proves that it's corrupt is awful. It's awful.
Yeah, really. Yeah, that's a giant leap. Here's something that's going on today that, maybe I'm naive, but I mean, traditionally our two parties are supposed to compete for voters, each by presenting a vision of the future and trying to convince the voters that their side has better ideas. Something different's happening now, in Georgia, and is coming apparently into other states. Right out in the open. I never thought I would see new voter suppression laws as a tool to maintain power. I mean, am I...
Well, I call myself more of a centrist because I'm not across-the-board lefty. But there's two issues I'm left on. One is these stupid wars we keep getting into, and I'm very much with the left on that, maybe for different motives, but I'm with them because they've been right. And Obama was the only guy in the top Democratic crowd that really opposed that war. And the other, the Iraq war. The other thing I cannot stand is this attempt of a minority, the whites, conservatives, to deny the majority rule. That is what democracy is. It's as simple as that. The majority rules. And right now, the majority, if you let everybody vote, is on the center and left, center, left, and left. That's where it is. And the fact that they have to come up with these tools like we'll get rid of Sunday voting, we'll make you have an ID card to vote by mail. The one on Sunday is clearly aimed at the black community and saying they go to souls to the polls. We're going to stop that in its tracks. Yeah. And the other one is, I don't mind an ID card rule. Give people 5 years or something to get the IDs. I mean, figure out a system where in the long haul, give it to them as part of their tax returns or something. Give people IDs. Everybody that gets a driver's license, everybody pays tax. Everybody should find an easy way to get their voter ID card or what can be used for voting ID. And if you don't want to do that, it's because you want to make it hard. You want to make a different standard for citizenship than just citizenship. And the new standard is, can you live in a complicated world? Do you have a car? And are you physically able to move around and find the Department of Transportation office across town where they actually give out the ID cards? Try to make it hard for an 80-year-old woman living in a row house. My grandparents lived in a neighborhood where few people had cars. And the African-American people, I think there are a lot of them that don't have cars in big cities. A lot of New Yorkers don't have cars. It's not so easy to bop around and find out where the agency has the issues ID cards.
No.
And if you want to do that, you're up to a game. You're up to the game of, okay, we're a minority of the voters, so we're going to make it harder for the majority to win. If they thought elections were stolen, I don't think they'd be going to such efforts to prevent voting.
Exactly right. That's right. That's right. And it should be okay to serve water to people standing in a voting line, don't you think? I mean, good Lord.
It's a challenge.
Man.
I'm impressed by the people that vote, and it's a good thing. I love the fact we had this very strong turnout in 2020, the biggest absolute numbers ever. It shows you, with all the cynicism and skepticism about our ability to control our future, that people did believe they could control their future, and they wanted to not to include Donald Trump. Right. But then again, that fight's not going to leave us. He gained 10 million more votes than he got in 2016. I think 2022 will be close again. 2024 will be close again. Oh. Do you notice that Joe Biden announced for re-election already?
Yes, I did.
I was very impressed with that. That is a very hopeful man in his late 70s.
Good for him. He's
going to run in his 80s, and good for him. He said he's fine. Maybe this is going to be the proof of our longevity. Our president's 80s. That.
Yeah, he's an inspiration in that way. Listen, before we go, I wanted to ask you to tell a story, if you would. It's a rather convoluted story, but I heard you tell it, and I know it's in your book, the Bobby Kennedy book. Bobby Kennedy, A Raging Spirit, by the way. A wonderful book. And it's a story that starts with Bobby and then goes to Fidel Castro and some other unsavory people, and then ends up in a helipad in Palm Springs. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know. Bobby learned about Judith Exner's relationship with his brother, the president, and he told him to get out of it. Bobby was always trying to protect Jack from his predilections with women. And Bobby loved his brother, but he saw the problem. And he never went after him over who he was or his predilections, but he went after him in particular cases, like, why are you hanging around with a girlfriend of a mobster, Sam Giancana?
Fair question.
And then what happened was Jack was supposed to spend a weekend with Frank Sinatra, which was a problem because Sinatra had his contacts with the underworld too, and Bobby knew all about these contacts that he had, and including Giancana. And he knew that Sinatra was a problem politically. The president of the United States shouldn't be hanging around a guy who had so many connections with that nightclub world he worked in all those years. These old guys that ran nightclubs and Sinatra knew them all, and they would decide whether you got the dates or not, whether you got the business, whether you were singing at night. They'd say, you're on tonight, the other guys are on. I mean, Tony Bennett's laughed about this. He said he used to talk at one show I was on about the mobsters whispering to each other in one of the front tables while he was performing, and he knew what they were doing. They were all made men. But the big thing came to a head was Bobby said to his brother, "Don't go to Sinatra's house this weekend in Palm Springs. Don't go there." And he said, so Kennedy wanted to go to Palm Springs that weekend, so he went to Bing Crosby's house, and he's also a Republican. And, and Sinatra had been boosting Kennedy with the mob and everybody else. Sure. And he finds out that Kennedy's not coming, and he's not only not coming for the weekend to stay with him, he's going to stay with Bing Crosby in Palm Springs. And everybody's going to know about this. So he took a hammer, a giant hammer, the kind you break concrete with, and he went out to the helipad that he had built just to receive the presidential Marine One helicopter and stood there smashing it apart.
Oh, my Lord.
Like he's in a rock quarry because he was so angry. Like he was so angry that he'd been betrayed. And that's, I think, when Frank Sinatra discovered that he was a Republican and became a big friend of Spiro Agnew and Ronald Reagan and the rest of them. You have a good memory. God. I had to just piece that baby together. That's all connected.
That's a fascinating story, but entertainment and politics were and are, I guess, inextricably linked in many ways. Campaigning is a form of show business to me many times. It's.
Well, here's a good one for you because I wrote speeches for Jimmy Carter, and one time, my wife and I were at the back of the East Room watching a speech I'd written, and it was all about St. Patrick's Day, and the guest of honor was Tip O'Neill, and I gussied it up to be about the tribute to the sophistication of the Irish, all that they'd written, all the great music, that the guy who wrote Dixie, the guy who,
Sure.
a bunch of other stuff. George M. Cohan, I had it all in there about the Irish. And additionally, like John Wayne and all the John Ford and all the great Western guys. And before he gets into what I wrote, the sophisticated stuff, Jimmy Carter looked at Tip O'Neill and his wife, and they said, "I understand this is the first time your wife has seen you sober on St. Patrick's Day." Okay. So fast forward a year later, I'm working as Tip's top guy. And I mentioned the fact that I had written that speech.
Yes.
And I said, but not that part. Not that part. I said, Mr. Speaker, that was Baptist humor. It wasn't for our crowd. He did not like it at all because he was embarrassed. You know, it's not funny to be called a drunk in front of your.
No.
And Faye Dunaway was there, and Dennis Day was there, and all these people in front of that crowd at the White House. The President of the United States declares you a drunk. Only give me a break.
Yeah, that's not good.
It's funny if you weren't the guy who was credited with writing that speech.
Oh, no kidding. Listen, you mentioned Tip O'Neill, and I didn't get to him. You spent years with him. That must have been an amazing experience because the guy seemed like a wonderful human being. Am I right?
He was the kind of liberal that I like, a liberal that bases his politics and his humanity on personal experience. I mean, for 50 some years, he looked out for the working class part of Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he had people coming with problems. I mean, a local congressman hears every problem in the world. Marriages going apart, alcoholism, kids in trouble, people out of money, people with health problems with nobody to look for them. Not everybody does this, but a lot of people go to their congressman and ask for help. And so they're hearing all this. There's a congressman in Philly who used to go home every night and hear confessions, as he put it. He just listened from 9 till midnight, I guess it was. So I think his liberalism came from reality. It wasn't from some left-wing ideology or something. I think he learned it from human experience. So I think that's why he was one time reading some letters from me, and he was challenging me. He said, "You don't believe this stuff, do you? You don't believe this." And then he said, "You Holy Cross conservative." You know, it's like, because he had gone to Boston College, the rival school.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, but I think, no, he's what you think, you know.
Yeah. And of course, the famous story you have told and written about where after business hours, he and Ronald Reagan would get together and
they were friends.
Drink. And
they were there. We didn't drink much.
They were buddies.
Tip didn't work at work, but Reagan hardly drank at all. I think they were just trying to make it work. And they did have that Irish thing in connection. They really wanted to work. They were in their 70s. This was their last act. There's no time to mess around and waste time. They wanted to solve problems like saving Social Security and ending the Cold War. And Tip was totally behind what Reagan was doing. And at that point, and it all was in the back room. I saw it. I knew that Tip, when Reagan was shot, he went to visit him in a hospital and he kissed him and they recited the 23rd Psalm together quietly, the two men. Wow. Politics is not all the mix up it's portrayed as. There are a lot of levels. When Tip retired, Bob Dole and Howard Baker, they all came over and sat with him and just sat shiva with him for a couple hours to say goodbye to him. It was nice. There's a lot of the human part of it we don't cover.
That's great. It's been fantastic talking to you. I could go on, but thank you. This is tremendous. Thank you so very much.
You're my buddy. We'll see you again. Every time we get together, it's always fun. Thank you so much.
Oh, great. Thanks.
You're the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Tom Scott's Podcast Express is produced by Dave Schroeder and Joseph Vella. If you like the Podcast Express, tell your friends, write a review, and subscribe to the series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other fine podcast directories. Tom Scott's Podcast Express uses Blue microphones and Zoom Corporation audio recorders. Tom Scott plays R.S. Berkeley musical instruments and Jody Jazz mouthpieces. For more information or to ask Tom a question, visit tomscottmusic.com. Until next time.